Hello and welcome to NL Interviews. Our guest today is Pradip Krishen, the tree man. He's been a multifaceted personality and worn several hats. He's been a director of cult films like Massey Sahib and Electric Moon, a lecturer at Delhi University's Ramdas College, but it is his current avatar as environmentalist and ecologist that interests us today. Pradip started studying trees 25 years ago as a hobby and has produced 3 wonderful books. The most famous of these is Trees of Delhi, a Field Guide. It was in this avatar as an environmentalist and ecologist that Pradip has become a petitioner against the Central Vista project in the Supreme Court. The twist in the tale is that he came on board as an advisor to HCP Design, which is the architectural firm headed by Bim Patel, in charge of the Central Vista project that he challenged. He's faced flack for collaborating with the enemy by his co-petitioners and several others opposed to the project. But Pradip says that the plan would have been pretty bad if he hadn't stepped in, and he pragmatically decided to use his expertise where he could in a particular part of the project, which is namely the Rajpath lawns and the plantation of those trees. He came on board at a time of massive concern about these beautiful shady Rai Jamun trees and the potential cutting down from the lawns. Many are relieved at his presence. In fact, he has 2 paradoxical and very interesting thoughts on this. One is that the Rai Jamuns are water guzzlers and should never have been there in the first place. Secondly, he says there are too many trees planted carelessly over the years by the CPWD, who followed no plan of what to plant and where to plant, and the end result has been a proliferation of non-native species. The end result of his participation is a successful one. Roughly 100 trees will be cut down out of a total of 4,000, approximately 4,000 that will remain on Rajpath. So that is a relief to hear. However, the question is this: with anything from 8 to 10,000 trees being cut, 18 buildings being demolished, a fragile heritage zone, roads on a fragile heritage zone being widened to 6-lane highway style, an underground drain, and 15-meter deep basements being dug up, the water table of the zone is going to be devastated. The Central Vista is a giant wrecking ball in a china shop, smashing through all these delicate, fragile ecologies and heritage without any modern sensibility or sensitivity. The environmental cost is going to be massive and it's going to be brutal. Here is a person who understands the 21st century's language of working with the environment, not against it. Yet he's working alongside this elephant on a rampage that is destroying everything in its path. While Pradip has worked on a significant aspect of the project, as critics say, ecologies are contiguous. They are not compartmentalized. Critics say that bringing ecological sense and future planning into one area is meaningless in the face of the absolute devastation of the ecology all around it. And worse, it implies that the rest of the project is okay too, though it's absolutely not. But Pradip believes his intervention has been successful. It's brought about a plan and a structure where none would have existed. It has proactively brought in native species that work best in Delhi's environment. So let's hear the answers to all these questions. So hi, Pradip, welcome, and good to see you. And we'll start off first of all by asking you, in what shape or what capacity are you involved in this project, the Central Vista project? First of all, let's clear that, because some people have the impression that you are, looking after some of the environmental aspects of the entire project. You have clarified that you are looking only particularly at the Rajpath lawns and the plantation over there and certain aspects of that. You are there, in what capacity are you there, as an advisor, as a consultant, to whom, to what? So just a little clarity around those issues, just to start off with.
Okay, I'll give you a little background, Alpana, so that it becomes clear. But sometime in May, I think it was, I saw an article in the Indian Express that was probably the first time that there was any news about what was being planned for Rajpath. And what it said essentially was that it said that all the jamun trees along Rajpath had reached their, they were now mature trees. They were ready to die. They had a lifespan of 100 years, and that therefore they were going to replace all the jamuns. And they talked about a tree scheme, a Lutyens tree scheme, which had all the species wrong. And I was very disturbed by this because, so I got into my car and I drove to Rajpath to check about the tree scheme, and I realized that they were in fact completely wrong. And I wrote an article very quickly in the next sort of day or two and sent it off to the Express, where I said that, look, this is just yet another example of how the entire Central Vista scheme is just, badly informed, that they're planning to do the wrong things. It was very, very worrying. I got a call maybe 2 or 3 days later from somebody who introduced himself as Bim Patel, who I didn't know at all, who said, look, I'm really sorry that you've written this article about a plan that hasn't really been formulated yet. Somebody spoke to a journalist when they shouldn't have. But we would really like your perspective. We'd love to know what you have to say, or what you would advise us to do for this place. And I said, look, yeah, but I'm a critic. I'm a petitioner against the Central Vista project. And maybe you don't want to associate with me, because I'm totally against what's going on. And he said, look, we teach your book in CEPT, of which he is the president. We have great regard for the work you do and for your perspective on something like this. So I'm prepared to work with you if you're prepared to work with me.
And let me just interrupt you, because at that point in time, here you are a petitioner in the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Your petition, I believe, is on the environmental violations of the project. That's what you were challenging.
Among other things. I mean, environment was only one.
Yes.
Yeah. I was not a petitioner because I'm concerned only about the environment. I was concerned about the fact that, here was this monumental project that didn't seem to be necessary. It seemed to be catering to the hubris and the things that Mr. Modi seems to want. I feel totally opposed to his regime and the way they think and the way they work.
Yes, you have been vocal about that.
Sorry?
You have been vocal about that. Yes.
Yeah, and the fact that it all happened without a proper consultation with the public. There seems to be a whole lot of things wrong with the way in which the project was approved and the selection of designs happened. So across the board, there was things wrong with it. So I was a petitioner for it all, not simply for some element of the plan.
Yeah, sure. I know. I understand that. So it is a broader vision, which I understand. What I'm asking is, when you got that call from Bimal Patel, would you like to work with me? If I'm happy to work with you, can we come to some sort of understanding about at least your expertise, and how you can help us do this project? What were the parameters of what ran through your mind at that time?
Well, my initial reaction was, let me think about it. I said, you think about it too, because you're wanting to associate with somebody who is opposed to the project. But let me also think about it, because, there's this whole issue of supping with the devil, so to speak. Are you going to associate with somebody that you're opposed to, right? So I did think about it, and I talked to some friends, and they said, look, if you think that you can make a difference to the plan and, actually avert disastrous developments along the Central Vista, then do so. But I got one very good piece of advice, and that was, look, don't do it as a paid consultant. Don't accept any money from ACP. Do it just as a voluntary, as an honorary job.
So
and
attend
the sessions. And if you find that you're not getting any traction at all, then walk out. Which is something you can do if you're not being paid, right?
You have said that your intervention, to your mind, has saved, or you're reasonably satisfied with what the outcome is going to be now that you have put in those interventions based on your expertise. So can you tell us what that plan originally was, and how what your role was in changing it, and what is the thing that you are now satisfied with that wasn't in the original plan?
Okay, so I think it would be fair to say that Bim Patel was actually right when he said that, look, we haven't formulated a plan. So when I joined the first Zoom session about this,
Yes.
I found that there was a horticulturist from Bangalore called Dr. Rao, who was the only other expert in the field there.
Okay.
And there was HCP and their people. Essentially people who are going to be doing the drafting and the planning and, and the drawings for the plan. To give you a sense of how it worked, I mean, when I first went in, I said, look, I think I want you guys to understand that you have to do something that's appropriate to the ecology of this place. And there's been a big change in the ecology of the Central Vista, because this would have been part of the the Bangar area, the floodplain of the Yamuna,
Right.
in the 50s or the 40s, when this place was first planted up, with a water table that would have been very high, right? And the Germans are technically the Rai Germans would probably have been selected for what I regard as the wrong reasons, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute. Whereas now it's no longer part of the floodplain because the Yamuna can't flood into this area. The water table has probably declined precipitously. And unless we can do something that is appropriate to the nature of this, the ecology of this place now, we're going to regret it, because water is going to become the huge problem.
So how did you convey this to an architect whose first concern is clearly not the ecology?
I was talking to Dr. Rao as the other expert on this body, but I was also trying to influence the way in which Bimal approached this whole thing. It was not simply a matter of choosing trees, but also looking at the ecology, looking at the grass, looking at the amount of water and moisture in this area.
So is this why you think that the Rai Jamans were the wrong selection of trees in the first place and should never have been there?
Earlier, when I was writing my book about Delhi's trees, I looked at the ways in which the British selected trees to line all the various avenues of New Delhi. And it's a curious list of trees because it doesn't conform to, it doesn't use any of the species that we're used to seeing on old, say, Mughal roads. There's no mango, there's no banyans, there's no shisham, there's none of the usual sort of roadside trees. And when I started to look at some of the documents that I found in the archives, I found that the British had two or three bugbears, two or three quirks in how they were selecting trees. For one, they didn't want to have deciduous trees, which I think was a mistake, because the natural ecology of Delhi, the natural response to the ecology of Delhi for a native tree is to be deciduous, is to drop your leaves in the dry season and then come up with this glorious burst of new foliage in spring, right? That's how native trees behave in Delhi. And I think that's a very beautiful aspect of what happens here. What I suspect that what happened was that, British horticulturists would say, go into a dry forest and see a jamun growing along a stream and say, look, everything else is dried out, but you've got the jamuns that are still evergreen, they still retain their leaves. Let's use a jamun along Rajpath, forgetting that the reason why the jamuns are able to retain their leaves is that they are growing along a perennial stream, right?
Right.
Now, because this is the floodplain, because the water table was high, but also I think perhaps primarily because the lawns are heavily watered. I mean, that's the nature of Duba lawns. The jamuns are getting a lot of water, and that's why they were able to do reasonably well here, right?
So if you were not in favor of the Rai Jamans, why did you decide to retain most of them? Is this the only part of the Central Vista project where public preference has actually played a role?
So I think it's true to say that the primary thing that I wanted to say to these people was, look, let's think of the ecology. Let's think of a suitable ecology for this place. Let's think about the future. Let's not only think about, the heritage. This is probably an area where I didn't actually make much headway, partly because I think the fact that this was Lutyens planted jamuns, and possibly the fact that there is a feeling that if you fiddle too much with trees, you're going to get an outcry from the public, which I think is a good result of the public engaging with these things. So then the next thing we had to deal with was, what do we do about the scheme, and what was the scheme in fact?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, very interesting to me, I didn't know this, but we looked at photographs from the 1940s, aerial photographs, and we found that there was a very spare scheme of Germans arranged in a particular kind of W or in a series of X's, depending on how you look at it. And it only had, I think the number was 386 Germans arranged, in this very particular pattern along the Central Vista.
Right.
I'm not talking of Vijay Chowk now, which had a slightly different scheme.
No. You have said that the CPWD had over the years pushed this to something like 1,200 or
1,200, yes.
1,200.
So
Right.
this scheme had been augmented.
Do you mean to say that nobody had looked at the original plans? Nobody knew what kind of pattern there was, and when you and Mr. Rao came in, that's when the actual work started of looking at what is possible or what went on earlier and so on.
See, look what happens with a horticultural department like the CPWDs, and this happens across the board with all municipal horticultural organizations, at least in Delhi that I know of, is that they get a budget to plant every year, and therefore they go on planting. So even if it's supposed to be an area that has open spaces, over time you will come to a point when you've just planted everything up because you go on planting. And the reason they go on planting is that they've got a budget that's allocated only for the planting, and if they don't plant, then that budget lapses. So
without a plan or without any kind of
there is no plan, and it's just relentless planting. I mean, I've said this in the context of Lodi Gardens in the past, that you just can't go on planting. You have to actually have a plan and say, this is a designated open space, keep it open, but they don't do that, right?
Right.
The CPWD clearly lost track of what the original plan was for the arrangement of Germans, right? So what they did was, if you look at that diamond plan, it has what I call a series of khalis and bharas. So there are places where there are intended to be Germans, and then places where there's clearly, they didn't want to have Germans because that was part of the X pattern.
Yeah.
And the CPWD clearly didn't understand this plan and just burrowed all the khalis. Right. So it became a solid, row of 4 rows on each side. And then they added additional rows. Then you got 10 rows of Germans. And that's how the Germans increased exponentially from 386 or 356 to about 1,200.
Yeah.
And then because of this planting imperative, what I call the planting imperative, they started planting other things. And it's completely haphazard. It makes no sense. There's no kind of discernible scheme. There was absolute rubbish there.
From what I read of what you have said earlier is that you are culling bits and creating bits just to sort of revert to some sort of originality in the plan, replacing the trees as they grow older with less water guzzling trees, and creating a planting plan for a scheme for the future, so that towards, as the trees die out and as they are replaced, you replace them with slightly better ones, and you only take away a minimal, which I think is some 26 trees or something that are going to be cut on.
It's 26 Germans and it's another 80 something other trees, among the other species. About 100, 110. Yeah.
And that would be within how many thousand overall on the Rajpath lawns?
It's 4,000 something.
Just on the Rajpath lawns?
Just on the Rajpath lawns.
So you're not counting IGNCA or National Museum, any of those?
Sadly, I didn't have anything to do with IGNCA. I only heard about it later as something that was, slated to happen, but it was not part of what I was being consulted about. Okay. So yeah, so I mean, you're absolutely right, Alpana. When I went in, I think it would be fair to say that they didn't have a plan. They didn't know what they were going to be doing. They presented to us the results of their of the photographs and the old documentation that they had received from the CPWD. Right. And when we looked at it, it was actually quite a surprise to all of us that there was this spare scheme, and then the question was, what do we do about it? Can we revert to the spare scheme? And I think all of us agreed that we couldn't, too much water had
Right.
flowed under the bridge,
Yeah.
But was there a way in which we could somehow refer to this scheme in whatever we were going to be doing to the I'm only talking
Right.
about the Jamans at the moment, right?
Right.
And Dr. Rao then came up with a scheme which we started calling the shivered scheme, because he took an X and then he
Yes.
drew long
Right.
dundies next to each
So
slanted line.
what you're saying is you're actually bringing back some of the original plan that was there, but with an enhanced sort of tree cover, which we have organically done over the years. And we come back to some sort of planning of this area.
That's
So
correct.
would you regard this as the definitive part of your intervention? I mean, this is just, to say that,
No,
look, I'm happy that we've been able to come to some sort of planning, some sort of understanding of what trees are good for the area or not. You know,
okay, I'll tackle that. So first of all, I'm coming in with the thought that they're going to be actually removing all the Rajamuns and replanting them. So that's
right.
not happening.
Yeah.
Secondly, the way the arrangement of the Jamuns is now being augmented with a scheme that I think is a much nicer scheme than simply retaining all of those trees in the way they are. Thirdly, we're potentiating the scheme with and introducing native trees that are going to actually make a difference to the way these Jamuns look, right? So we introduced trees. We had a lot of discussion about this, the particular species we were going to use, and I'm very happy to say that they accepted all my suggestions on this score. So this was also important because this then becomes the template for how the Jamuns are replaced over time. So as Jamuns start dying or start suffering in one way or the other, this is how they get replaced. When it came to all the other trees, it was tricky, because I would say that in an ideal world, they should all have been swept away, but yeah, I mean, no, I mean, in an ideal world, in the sense that purely from a schematic, from the point of view of the scheme and the design, but you can't do that. You can't do that with the sheer number of trees now that populate this area. Grasses are terrible because the way in which duba and lawn grasses are used in landscapes in India, they're very thirsty. Landscape laws in Southern California now are very, very stringent about you're only allowed to have 5% of lawn in any landscape, in any new landscape that is proposed in several counties of Southern California now. And I found that they've actually done quite a lot of work to find alternate species, and in many cases they've developed hybrids that don't require the amount of water that is used. So we're not talking about finishing the sittability or the stollability of these places, but just replacing duba, Cynodon dactylon, which requires to be constantly watered. Sorry?
Right. Is that happening or that's not happening?
Yeah, so what apparently has happened is that we've run into a lot of opposition from the CPWD, which, I guess like a lot of behemoth organizations doesn't want to try out something new, right? So this is probably something that we would need to work with them over time, where you're trying different protocols.
Okay.
So, they don't want to do things like that.
I'd like to ask you something now a little different from the actual plan itself, which is about your role as a petitioner earlier on, and then your role as an advisory to HCP design, which is of course in charge of the entire Central Vista project. You're trying to ensure that water, which is, like you said, the biggest resource that we are going to face, that is disturbed as little as possible. But in the larger picture, I mean, you have basements that are being dug to 15 meters. You have, I mean, there's absolutely nightmarish and horrific scenarios being painted for traffic, that they're going to enlarge the lanes, Ashoka Road to a 6-lane road, Shah Jahan Road, I don't know, some of the roads around the area have to be expanded, widened, which means the chopping off, I don't know how many more thousands of trees. Of course, the IGNCA, the total number of trees cut down is going to be so massive that does it really matter if you save a few trees or if you don't save a few trees? In the larger picture of water guzzling to the extent that is going to happen, how does it matter? Does your intervention matter?
Yeah, I don't know. If the whole IGNCA thing, for example, only happened later. I only discovered this later. See, when I jumped in, Alpana, I'm
Mm,
jumping in because I'm saying the kind of thinking that's going on in my mind is, if I accept what Bimal's invitation to come in,
mm,
and if I can make a difference, is this worth doing or not? Right? Uh,
right.
what happens if I don't go in? I mean, am I
Mm,
content to sort of sit here and
mm,
say, oh my God, tear my hair because they're doing things that I consider completely wrong?
mm,
And what I see is that if I can make a real difference about making sure that they do a sensible plan for the bit
mm.
that they've invited me in for, I think it's worth doing, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't change my opposition to the whole Central
Yeah.
Vista plan.
Yeah. Okay.
I
I get that.
continue to remain completely opposed to it. I think it's an awful idea.
Yeah.
I think that many elements of it are just sort of egregiously wrong.
Okay.
uh, I think that there are some things that perhaps ought to happen, like a lot of these old buildings like Nirman Bhavan and Shastri Bhavan and all are terrible, but I would love them to have been redesigned in an open,
Open,
participative,
accessible way.
yeah,
Participative way. Exactly.
yeah,
No, what I'm saying is that your intervention in such a small, eventually a small bit of the larger, I mean, you are saving the trees or the grasses from being water guzzlers, but look at the amount of water, the water table that's going to be disturbed there is just horrific. I mean, it is so massive that in the end, saving these trees may or may not be worth it. And the point I'm coming to is that the intervention of this bit might confer legitimacy on the rest of it. There are a lot of people, like I started off with this interview telling you that a lot of people think that you are handling the environmental sort of aspect of Central Vista. Now, that's obviously something you're not doing. And I think it's clear from what you said that you're not doing that.
yeah,
But even things like the IGNCA, the cutting of trees over there, or the vice president's house, or whatever, when we look at Central Vista as a whole, the project as a
yeah,
whole,
yeah, yeah,
the ecological part of it is such a nightmare because there is absolutely no sense. There's no sense in chopping down 3,000, 4,000 trees. It makes a giant hole where a natural sort of organic ecosystem had started to flourish. I mean, there are birds that come in here to rest on those mature trees. There is a whole pattern of the water table, being reasonably high compared to the rest of Delhi. There is the ridge to Yamuna connection of the water flowing, there. Though you said that has been slightly disturbed, but still, I mean, that is a large green lung of Delhi. Um, it's is does your involvement then confer legitimacy on the removal of all those?
well, I hope not. I mean, I hope to God not. um, I mean, I will be vocal about the IGNC and what's happening there. People have part of the interview that wasn't actually published, I think, in the Indian Express, was about the IGNCA, and they said that you know there's this whole business of compensatory afforestation,
Exactly,
which
which
is
you have
which is
debunked, but said that it's
yeah, it's
rubbish.
rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. It's rubbish here. It's rubbish everywhere else.
Exactly.
I,
So, and
I,
also where they plant them. I mean, they're going to plant them in some little plot far away, which doesn't affect the ecology of this area at all, which should be so radically disturbed.
yeah.
I mean, you take out 3,000 trees from anywhere, that's likely to kill that ecological sphere in
Yeah.
any case. So,
No, I absolutely agree, Alpana. I think that if you take the ecological and environmental costs of everything that's being done on the Central Vista, it's massive. And any little bit of fiddling that I managed to do on the Central Vista is a very, very small part of it, you know, and it's not, certainly doesn't offset the huge amount of disturbance that's happening. Nevertheless, I think that I would have been extremely uncomfortable to have stepped away and said, TK, I'll do what you like. I'm just going to sit here and criticize you, you know, when I
Mm.
know that it might be possible for me to actually make a difference to what is actually planned to happen on those huge lawns.
Okay. So, in a sense, we are looking at a micro view of a certain spot in Central Vista, right? We can't look at the broader view because, the expertise has not been sought. You know, I mean, this is a part of the Central Vista project, the Rajpath lawns, that in any case were going to remain lawns. I mean, yes, they have these interventions like bridges, like underground. Yeah,
We weren't even sure that they were going to remain lawns. I mean, so the kind of ideas that were floating around without being
yeah, but
mentioned
I
was
think,
that
yeah,
this is going to be a place where people are not going to be able to enter anymore. It's
yeah,
no
but
longer going to be
I
a
think
public
that was,
space. So
yeah, that was explained by the winning design, which was Bim Patel's design. I mean, the lawns were going to remain the lawns, except these giant monuments, monumental buildings, these massive, behemoth kind of buildings were going to come up on either side, flanking the lawns and shutting out the light, and being extended over the trees, and so on and so forth. So yes, it's going to become a security zone, but this part is going to remain more or less as it is in the micro view. Um,
yeah.
and I think that is the extent of the opposition that your intervention may have sparked, which is to say that, look, fiddling with the micro view is irrelevant, or at worst legitimizes the destruction in the macro view.
I was going to say that it's not such a small part of the Central Vista. It's a pretty large part,
Okay,
of, just purely in terms of the acreage. You know, it's
right.
a massive part of the Central Vista. And secondly, I don't think that anybody is within the project is going around saying, look, Mr. Pradip Krishen is saying this is fine, therefore we're doing this, you know. Certainly my name has not been invoked for the IGNCA or all the stuff that's
No,
happening
no, but
there.
I mean, I'm
So
talking about the
legitimacy,
average citizen. It's not, the average citizen looks at an expert, somebody who's well known in your field like you, and would
yeah.
say, okay, Pradip Krishen is on this. I'm sort of at least, oh, thank God. Is that an aesthetic intervention that you would call it? Would you call it a heritage intervention? How exactly would you say that that makes you at least satisfied to some extent?
Well, the intervention obviously has to do
I
with,
mean, since it's not
there
an
are,
ecological intervention in the sense that you are not being able to control, if your intent is to stop the water guzzling, it doesn't even make a difference, because with the basements of 15 going down 15 meters, uh, you know, uh, and the earth mover, the metro rail going around Rajpath, which is going to be dug down,
mhm.
everything, and the trees that are going to be chopped off, uh, the ecosystem is pretty much shattered there. So,
Yeah, I mean, look, as far as the water guzzling aspect is concerned, Alpana, the um, the lawns themselves, um, I think what's happened is that we've planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the CPWD. We're saying, look, don't use your normal stuff. Let's work towards something better. It's something which to them comes as a surprise. They do this automatically without sort of even questioning it. Whether we
right.
will have the cachet to be able to influence them over time, I don't know. But it's certainly something that I think um, the something the public can demand of the CPWD, right? As far as the trees are concerned, we've got the same Germans. So yes, there's no big difference there, except that we're introducing new species that are native that don't need to be watered at all, right? Both within the lines of Germans, as well as the outer line, which forms the boundaries of the new buildings that are coming in. So it's going to make a difference. How much difference? Hard to quantify.
Okay, so staying with the micro view then, you're satisfied that the plantations make ecological sense now, though paradoxically, the water guzzlers, the Rajamans, will still remain. I mean, no one wants to see them go now, despite being planted haphazardly or in an unplanned way. They're practically heritage trees now.
Um, so there's a clear sense in which the heritage scheme trumps the ecology when we're doing this, right? And the calculation, I think, is that, look, we can't fiddle too much with the heritage because it'll cause too much of a disruption, you know?
Yes, but it's sort of ironic when you say that. They can't fiddle with the heritage, they're demolishing 18 buildings and, cutting down 3,000 trees. So, there's not much left to fiddle with. Yeah,
That's a different area, no?
yeah.
It's a different area that I was not even consulted about.
Let me ask you about the other parts of this project that you might be involved with, which is the Arboretum and the New India Gardens. Now, again, why are you laughing?
I'm laughing at the New India Gardens because
Okay.
all right.
Are you involved in it? Are you
No,
going to be part of it?
no, not at all.
Not at all. So
Not
either
at all.
for the Arboretum or the New
No,
India.
so the Arboretum, I don't know, but okay, let me deal with them one by one.
Okay, yeah.
The New India Garden is something the CPWD is doing on its own without the involvement of HCP. So this is their project. They've hired, I believe they've hired the National Botanical Research Institute in Lucknow to do it for them, and they've actually made the design. So this has nothing to do with HCP and nothing to do with me either.
Okay.
When we finished the consultations about the Central Vista, the sort of Rajpath and Vijay Chowk, Bimal said, can we show you what we're planning to do behind Rashtrapati Bhavan? I wasn't even aware that there was anything planned for that area. And he did a he did a PowerPoint presentation to me where he showed me what they were planning to do. Quite frankly, I was horrified because what was on the anvil was some huge glass houses from the future with computer controlled, temperature controls and humidity controls, and they were going to grow. The plan was about growing all the endangered plants of India from all the different biomes of this country. So I looked at this increasingly uncomfortable as it was unfolding. And then when Bimal asked me at the end what I thought of it, I said, look, I think it's ridiculous. I think it's impractical and it's absurd. I was very, very sort of, vocal about my opposition to it. And he asked me why. So I told him, I said, look, first of all, growing plants from different biomes is not simply a matter of getting your temperature right or your humidity right, but it's also about getting your microbes right and getting your soils right. And we don't have the expertise here. And to try and build these massive, humongous glass houses, as theaters in which to take people through and to have these endangered plants is just not a very good idea at all. And he said, what would you say instead? What should we do instead? And I said, well, look, you have a swathe of the central ridge sitting inside this part of Rashtrapati Bhavan. There is nothing better than being able to actually show people how to make a beautiful, ecologically wonderful forest of that belongs to this rocky ridge, then to do that in this place, and then to embellish it with, if you like, galleries, immersive galleries, and actually interpret this place for visitors.
So is this something like Kew Gardens, or what would it be? I mean, is there something you have in mind that when you're talking about it, what kind of place would it be?
Nothing is happening on this now. This is obviously something that might happen in the future. But at the moment, they've taken this on board. They've said, yes, we're willing to reconsider this whole thing, and we think it's a wonderful idea to link it to Delhi's natural, tropical thorn forest.
Having been on the inside of decision making or understanding, the institutions that are working within the government, whether it's the government or it's the public-private partnership with the HCP, whatever it is. What is the systemic or the overall manner of the movement of this project, the progress of this project? Is there room for expertise to come in? Is there room for intervention? Is there access? Is there any kind of, having intervened for one particular thing, which has brought about, according to you, the expert, some decent results. Why, or can there be other points of entry? Should other people intervene? Should other people offer their expertise, or is there room for them to come in? Because after all, this project has gone along at warp speed without even a sham or modicum of citizen
involvement. Yeah.
Involvement.
Yeah. To come back to your question about whether there's room for anybody else, I have,
and should people intervene? Of course, they've been given no space to, but there are architects, there are urban planners who've been crying themselves hoarse about what can be done to Parliament, for instance. Parliament has been, we are building a new Parliament when the existing one can be changed. It can be refurbed. It can be, redone to accommodate a largest number of people. It's a heritage project. There's nothing new about it. They're done all over the world. So it should be able to be changed, but nobody's accepted that information.
In my mind, and this is maybe wishful thinking. I would love people to be involved, for example, in designing the National Museum and what happens to it. Now, whether this will happen, whether there's room for it to happen, I don't know. I don't know what the procedures would be. Somebody would need to be open to this. People, there'd have to be some sort of
entry. Do you see? That's what I'm asking you. You've been on the inside. As somebody on the outside, you have been on the inside. Is there room for that?
So, so what happened in my case was that I was critical of a particular aspect, and Bim Patel said, "Oops, we'd like you to actually tell us what to do," and then that happened. So,
but do you see that happening anywhere else, or?
I think it could. I think if people could, either individually or collectively, sort of be able to say to them or to whoever, to Mr. Modi perhaps, that look, we think that what's happening to the National Museum could possibly be disastrous, and here's a whole new way to do it. Perhaps you're open to being invited in, but I would like that to happen. It would be wonderful if that happens. Whether that happens or not, I have no means of knowing. Given that it's a fait accompli, that it's going to happen anyway, right? To influence how it happens would be wonderful.
Do we again, to ask you as people who are on the same side, you and me, I'm opposed to it. You are opposed to it equally. Even though you have been able to intervene in a certain aspect of it. Do we regard it as a fait accompli now, or do we, continue to oppose it and continue to list our reasons for opposing it, which are extremely valid? A, that is completely illegal. B, that there's no public consultation at all, and there's no, there's no reasonable or logical framework, whether it's time, whether it's consultation, whether it is public interest or democracy. On none of these parameters does it pass. So
I don't think that there's any argument about. I think we have to go on insisting on the things that we believe in. There's no question of stopping that. On the other hand, from a practical point of view, what we have to perhaps see is that Mr. Modi has the judiciary sitting in his pocket. They're going to do his bidding no matter what. That we've seen this already with various attempts to actually challenge this in the courts. And the chances are heavily that they will go on doing what they're doing regardless.
So is there no point in challenging further, or you think there is?
I think there is still point, because whether
should we all just give up and say, okay? I'm not saying it facetiously at all.
Yeah, no, I don't think you ought to
just give up and say, okay, now actually I physically can't do anything.
Look, I think that when you're opposing something on a certain principle, then you don't give up. Even if the cause is hopeless, because you're still influencing people, you're still influencing people's attitudes. I think that's worth doing. And Mr. Modi, let's face it, hopefully he's not going to be around forever. There will be space, there will be opportunity for a lot of these things to, even if they happen in the way they're happening now, they can still change. A museum, if it comes up now in a way that is perhaps not the kind of museum that we would want it to be, 10 years down the line with a completely different regime, perhaps can be repurposed again, you know? It's true of the Central Vista Avenue as well, and with the trees and with everything else. I would certainly like to think that.
Yeah, sorry, the trees are something, you know, they can be redone, but once you put up 10 gigantic buildings, you demolish 18, and you know, move your cultural treasures in any which way, in which most records suggest that when you move these cultural treasures, half of them are lost or stolen or broken or finished, you know. So when you have done this massive undoable thing, you can't go back, you know. That's a hard one.
I don't
So
know.
those things can't be redone in the sense.
Well, the buildings can't be wished away, but I think that
Yeah.
I think a museum can be done. You know, I think that what you do to a museum, especially if you have a huge groundswell of opinion that supports you, and hopefully
And
there
the
will be a
3,000
big.
trees that are chopped down. I mean, you know, like I said, the ecological black hole that is going to descend on Rajpath and Central Vista, which is huge by any standards. I mean, like I said, it's so massive that uh, you know, however wonderful a few trees here and there would be, it's not going to make a difference because the water table is going to be shot to pieces in any case, you know. So, you know, in the end, we come back to the same thing, that it's just a terrible project, and you seem to agree with that, you know.
I do
Yeah.
agree with it.
So, um, so okay, let me just put it one way. When you look at the Central Vista as a sort of entirety, and you see your intervention in it, will you be the other concerns you had when you petitioned this, when you challenged this project? Do those then come to a sort of a different? Do you come to a different understanding of those, or you just keep them separately? Are you sort of?
No, there's no question of it coming to a different understanding. I still feel completely opposed to the project in every possible way, Alpana. There's no way. But I'm glad I did what I did. You know, I don't regret it. You know, I think that it was worth doing.
Right.
I would do it again if the opportunity came up.
Okay, so thank you very much, Pradip. Great having you, and
All right.
thanks so much for explaining the whole project to us again. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We, being an independent platform, depend on our readers, viewers, and listeners. Support independent media by subscribing to Newslaundry. Go to newslaundry.com, click on the subscribe button at the top, and pay to keep news free.